When I made the video about Duginism, circa 8 years ago or something, probably even more than that by the time I actually published this episode, that was a time when only those who are truly interested and understood and knew what they're talking about were actually writing or scripting things about Russian propaganda and were looking into Russian propaganda. Unfortunately, with Russia's escalation in Ukraine, started in February 2022, all sorts of, let's call them neophytes, I guess, and all sorts of interested parties with various ulterior motives, be them political or financial or whatever, have joined the conversation, some of them in good faith, but quite a lot of them in very bad faith. And as a result, the notion of Russian propaganda has been turned into something really murky and indeed something to be used as a weapon in itself. The very threat of Russian propaganda became its own boogeyman. But really, Russian propaganda hasn't changed that much, or when it did change, it changed in the sense that it became worse, more transparent, less professional, and there are multiple reasons for that too. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the propaganda basement once again. We're approaching the end of the season, so the first three episodes were in English, the middle of the season was in Romanian, and the last two episodes once again in English. So Russian propaganda, I was saying in the intro that the threat of Russian propaganda turned into its own boogeyman, alongside with the usual slurs or whatever labels, right? In 2015, labeling someone a Putinist required a relatively high standard of evidence, which in the case of legit Putinists, it was easy also to deliver if by someone who was interested into the topic and knew what they were talking about. In 2023, late 2023 or early 2024, depends on when I'm publishing this, Putinist and Vatnik and all sorts of other slurs have become commonplace in places where they don't belong. Sometimes due to some various forms of misunderstanding, and sometimes due to good old partisanship and good old financial interests. So, you know, if you are a mainstream conservative center-right party and you want to get rid of genuine right-wing parties, you try to call them Putinists. So that's one option. Just like, Putinist these days became its own what do you call it, slur with its own life, I guess. Same with Russian propaganda, right? And any form of socially conservative propaganda runs the risk of being called Russian propaganda even when it's not, and making the difference between the two is intentionally obscured, generally speaking, by the Western left, because the Western left obviously is trying to use the situation for its own political gains. Unfortunately for the Western left, it is a tactic that has a very limited use, but I suppose nobody told them that, and if they had asked someone who actually understands Russian propaganda, they would have known. But nevertheless, it's still attempted, because why not? It's not like the left has any new ideas recently, and that's because, well, peak woke has passed, and it becomes a little bit more problematic to maintain their own coalition, so there's that. With that said, the actual Russian propaganda, the one from which I'll show to you today, hasn't changed that much, or when it did change, it changed for the worse if you're looking from the Russian perspective, or for the better if you're looking from the anti-Russian perspective, in the sense that it became more transparent, more easy to notice, more easy to spot, and more easy even to counteract as well. In the past, Russian propaganda had the more dare I say, respect for the wisdom and intelligence of the audience. These days, it seems that those who actually write Russian propaganda tend to assume that anyone reading them has an IQ about the level of room temperature. And it's an issue that they are aware too. There was a few months ago Vladimir Solovyov was noticing in one of his shows that in the West only idiots support us. That's a direct quote, us being Russia. So, they know it, but for some reason they can't seem to find a way to remedy it. Maybe they can't. Maybe some of my good old friends have a point when they say that Russian propaganda collapsed in quality because most of the good writers, and that is to say professional ones, were defected to Ukraine. Maybe there is some truth to that. I have yet to see any definitive evidence, but certainly there is some circumstantial evidence in any event. So there's basically still two kinds of propaganda. The most obvious one and the little bit subversive one. Now this latter quality dropped in this latter type dropped in quality quite significantly since the escalation in 2022. But the original one, which is very in your face, this one also dropped a little bit in quality, but not as much as the latter one. So to waste as little of your time as possible, let's look very briefly on the official propaganda. So this is a newspaper from July the 20th, 2022. You see, argumenti.ru, straight up from Mother Russia. I bought this one from Moldova right after Moldova said that they banned Russian propaganda. They banned it so well that you can buy Russian newspapers from the newspaper store located in the corner of the building of the seat of the government. So, there's that honks. Anyway, so 20 Americans disappeared in Vinnytsia. What happened there? This one was a lie, and it took very little to be proven a lie. Long-awaited Stalinist economy arrives. So, just straight up, but just basic Stalinism, nothing serious. Ukraine is dragging the United States to a catastrophe. Again, this was in July 2022. The catastrophe has failed to arrive, but hey, at least they tried. Not much we can do. I like the name of the section, Prava Человека. In any event, the aviation saloon for defense technology 2022 happened. What's in it for Russia? And it's a long article about how something bad happened. That is to say, nobody cared about Russian technology anymore. So there's that. Russian economy grew by $1 trillion. But is that enough? Well, it depends on what you want to do with it, I suppose. Away from magnet cities, essentially it's a long article about why Russians don't want to live in remote cities. So, they don't want to be unironically from Chelyabinsk. They want to be where the cool kids are, but the problem is that where the cool kids are, it's already too crowded, and it's basically a very long description of what I usually call the rest of Russia, which is why I always tell people that, Moskalistan is the 1387 kind of country. 13% of the people live in the places that everyone knows. So that will be St. Petersburg, Rostov, Moscow, and Kazan. So there's basically these four places for the most part. And then 87% of the people live in the rest of Russia, which is very different from what the tourists used to see back in the days when Russia had tourists. I suppose you can still do tourism in Russia now too, but why would you? In any event, it just is what it is. So yeah, it's very basic bitch official propaganda, nothing really serious. And this is what people refer to when they say official propaganda. It's this kind of newspaper that is not too overtly pro-Z, but definitely Z, and definitely official narratives of the Russian regime, and exported into the post-Soviet countries that still allow them. So that would be, in this case, Moldova. I suppose Kyrgyzstan also allows them. Although, to be honest, I have looked. I mean, this is from July 2022. In August 2022, when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I tried to find Russian newspapers and I couldn't. I don't know if they're not allowed or I was just unlucky when I tried to find them. So yeah, nothing really serious, just argumenty недели, the arguments of the week. This is what we would call basic bitch official propaganda, official Russian propaganda. And again, this is the least scary part because this one is very upfront. You know what you're getting into. And there's nothing really special about it. Then, I think I did show you in the first episode these kinds. So this is Komsomolskaya Pravda. I think I read an article to you from this, not from this particular paper, another edition I read to you, but still. This is a basic bitch tabloid, and I was expecting, considering its name and considering its history, to also find something that is, I don't know, politically problematic about it. I suppose the only thing problematic about it, I'm partially joking, is that their meteorological map doesn't show Transnistria as separate. Yeah, it has all of the names of Moldova in Russian, but it doesn't show Transnistria as separate. It doesn't even show the quote-unquote border. Now, that's of course not a big surprise. Friendly reminder to everyone, not even Russia recognizes the so-called Pridnestrovan Moldovan Republic as a separate place. So there's that. But still, I mean, even this newspaper, I don't even though it's called Komsomolskaya Pravda, I don't think it should be classified as Russian propaganda. But I suppose this one is a little bit, yes, the fact that Moldovans still go to Odessa for beach, even though it's a wartime. Again, this is a paper from August 2023, I think. I don't want to say something wrong. Yes, 9 to 16th of August 2023. But it's really just a basic bitch tabloid. Yeah, there you go. So this is their in the state language. Yeah, it talks about the local elections. The husband of some celebrity that died. I have no idea who she was. I suppose she was important since all of the tabloids in that period were filled with discussions about her life and apparently about her fortune. There's especially Komsomolskaya Pravda dedicates ample time about who gets her fortune, that is in financial fortune. Here's something cute. You don't see this in the West anymore, definitely. The TV schedule. So, you know, again, this is, there you go, Monday, August 14th, Tuesday, August the 15th, and it shows all of the TV stations. Oh, there you go, it even has the Romanian ones here. So, yeah, it's this is definitely a live relic of the past when it comes to, but again, I don't classify this as propaganda. But the most excited flag people would even call this propaganda, simply because it is in Russian. Now, I wouldn't be particularly upset if Komsomolskaya Pravda would end up sanctioned. I mean, just because you're called Komsomolskaya Pravda u principu, just out of principle. But still, in full fairness, despite its name and its claimed tradition, it's just really not a propaganda type of newspaper. But okay, this one is edited in Russian, but for Moldova, so you could say, well, it is what it is. Что делать, ничего делать. But then there's this one, Argumenты и факты, your newspaper, Arguments and Facts. And this one is even more interesting, not because it's not propaganda, but it's printed in Russia. So this one is an actual Russian paper from August the 30th to September the 5th, 2023. So again, and it's a tabloid. This newspaper in particular holds the record for the most sales of a newspaper in the world. It was very popular in late Soviet period and the first few years of the post-Soviet period. At the time, it was part of the Perestroika movement. So, it has a political background, just like Komsomolskaya Pravda. But just like Komsomolskaya Pravda, it became mostly a tabloid. There's just not, where do you buy potatoes? It's really nothing. How much does it cost to dress your child for school? There you go. So shoes is whatever ruble. Okay, I guess dressing your child luxuriously, 14,000 rubles for those shoes. Goodness me. But then again, a ruble is increasingly worth nothing point something. So I probably shouldn't be surprised that the prices make no sense whatsoever to me at this point. But yeah, so this one is also mostly a tabloid. It has a few hints here and there. It has a page separate for Moldova, so it still does try to get itself involved. Now, but generally speaking, it's not overtly propagandistic. Okay, in this part it gets a little bit. Yeah, this one is even more of a colored page for the TV programming of the following days. Again, a very impressive relic of the past. I've seen these things in Bulgaria too, but I don't think they're in Romania. They're long gone, and I'm not convinced that it is a good thing that they're long gone. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe people shouldn't be watching TVs. TV is dead after all, but. Still, the fact that these kinds of newspapers are still around in some places, I think that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing that printed newspapers are essentially out in so many countries of Europe. In any event, so yeah, as you can see, it's nothing really serious. You don't even have to understand Russian necessarily to figure out that for the most part, this is not a propaganda newspaper. It's shut down your brain and enjoy it. And these kinds of things, these kinds of papers, also serve a propaganda purpose, although an indirect one, in the sense that it keeps the audience busy with bullshit, with nonsense, and thus it works statistically. It works. The people who are connected generally or primarily to Russian media, if they don't want to see politics, then they'll tune into this and they'll be busy with this, which over the long run it ends with a lot of people becoming what we would call depoliticized. That is to say, totally apathetic to politics, which is the case with at least 60% of the population of the Russian Federation, and an apathetic, totally depoliticized population. By the way, it's also easier to control. It's part of the demoralization strategy. It works because if it hadn't been working, it would have been abandoned a long time ago. And keeping the plebs apathetic tends to help quite a lot if you don't want to be questioned about your policies, right? So there's that. All right. And then there is these kinds of papers. So there you go. Happy Victory Day. And of course, if it's Victory Day, it has to be from May 5th, 2023. Close enough. The price 7 Moldavian lei. Moldavski Vedomost. It's a very, very commie newspaper. Very, very Russian newspaper. There's no secret about it. And this newspaper is the kind of Russian propaganda that everyone should be paying attention to and be on the lookout to dismantle. Unfortunately, for everyone else, and fortunately for the Russian propaganda, this kind of propaganda is the least addressed by those who purport to oppose Russian propaganda, and that's because addressing these ones is hard. It requires reading wrong articles, it requires actually having an idea about what you're talking about, and again, that's a very difficult task. So yeah, let's try to read a little bit, shall we? Why not? So, Lampochka Mai Sandu, right? So, Maya Sandu's light bulb, I guess, out of 5,870 million lei, only 3,432 millions were spent on compensation compensating the electricity bill. Where is the rest? Asks Dumitru Barbolată, despite him having a very Romanian name. He insists, in fact, somewhere else in this newspaper, he even says that he insists on writing in Russian and speaking almost exclusively in Russian. So yeah, anyway, it goes something like this. Let me remind you of the circumstances of how this year, from April the 1st, pensioners' pensions were indexed by only 15%, were increased by only 15%. Both the Minister of Labor, Alex Buzu, and the Minister of Finance, Veronica Vagaleva, stated that 5 billion lei from the social insurance budget revenues were allegedly redirected to the Energy Vulnerability Compensation Fund. At the same time, last year, representatives of the same government, although personally different ministers and prime ministers, claimed that they received financial support from European partners to compensate the population for energy costs. Previously, I presented a detailed analysis of the situation with social networks, income and social expenses. He explained what a mess there is in accounting for social contributions and their expenses. It is unknown what tens of billions of lei are being spent on. Let me remind you that last year it was planned to allocate 870 million lei to the state budget to partially cover the population's expenses for paying for energy resources for November and December. That would be natural gas, electricity, and centralized heating. The 2023 budget includes another 5,000 million lei. Total 5,870 billion lei. From the mouths of the above mentioned ministers, and then at a government meeting when approving the indexation of pensions from April the 1st by 15%, we learned that 5 billion lei from social budget revenues were allegedly redirected to compensate for energy vulnerability. Although the Ministry of Finance previously reported on the executions of budgets for 2022, and on April the 28th, the results of the first quarter of this year were announced. There is no mention in the relevant reports of transfers for amounts to compensate for the cost of energy resources. In other words, he's alleged a bit of corruption and embezzlement, I suppose. I cannot disclose the sources of information. Oh, of course you can't. On the basis of which I was able to determine the actual amounts allocated from the state budget to compensate the cost. I present only the results, and I'll show you a table, and I suppose this is the table, right? In any event. From the data presented, we see that in November to December 2022, a total of 1,242 million lei were allocated for compensation, including 895 million for gas payments. It turns out that they announced the illegal transfer of 5 billion lei from social security and still did not provide it. As already mentioned, for 2022, the Ministry of Finance could not allocate a single banya of compensation because although the law on the state budget provided for this, the Ministry of Finance forgot to provide it in its order. Right. Let me remind you that on July the 28th, 2022, the Parliament adopted a law on the Energy Vulnerability Fund. According to that law, the sources of finances had to be the state budget, European funds or other external revenues, and some other sources. Thus, the special law did not provide for transfer of social security revenues to compensate for the cost of energy resources. And it goes like this. Essentially, he's found potentially a loophole in the accounting, and he's making basically the argument that, Maya Sandu and her regime are stealing the money, the shekelim of the pensioners. And the thing is that I haven't been able to find, admittedly, I only spent about 40 minutes trying to find a refutation to this, and there isn't one. So I am either to assume that the guy is right, or that he's wrong, but those who are supposed to say so didn't care that much. And that's quite unfortunate, because the babushkas will be reading Moldovskie Vedomosti. They will not be reading DS.md or Newsmaker or any of the other more posh forms of official information, right? So there's that. Then, of course, this the newspaper being from May, it was, of course, very busy with trashing the summit from Bulboca. If you remember, there is a new platform at the European level. It's called the European Political Community Summit, which takes place, I think, every 3 months or so, something like that, or maybe every 6 months, whatever. There's already been 2 of them. One of them, the first one, was held in Moldova, just a few kilometers off of Chisinau, in a place called Bulboca. And the second one took place in Spain in October, I think, 2023. And probably by the time I'm publishing this, a third one would have taken place, but I have no idea where they set the next one. In any event, that's of little importance. What was of importance is that spending the shekels for that summit was far from transparent, and admittedly, after the summit, the Maya Sandu regime did publish some numbers which had some connection to reality, gotta admit that. But nevertheless, it still allowed for a lot of speculation from the Russian language media, Russian propaganda, whatever you want to call it. The Russians from so-called Transnistria had a field day with the restrictions on freedom of movement around the summit that were imposed for a few hours, oftentimes, or maybe a full day, and those were also very not very well explained. But nevertheless, when it comes to defending the summit, at least they did a better job, but they still didn't do a good job about that, about compensating the bills. Luckily for the pro-Western regime in Moldova, and unfortunately for the Russian propaganda, both the previous winter was mild, and this one catches Moldova slightly better prepared than the previous one. So eventually that one didn't land that well. Nevertheless, it was one of the own goals, because they didn't even bother to counteract it. Okay, let's read some more. What is this here? We have Russophobia, European integration, still not in sight, or not in sight, essentially. Prime Minister Dorin Recean announced a certain list of Russian officials who are prohibited from entering Moldova. For some reason, so far only the relevant authorities have it, but it will be made public at the right time. Allegedly, Russian President Vladimir Putin is also included in this list, but for now, just in words. In turn, Russia banned the entry of the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and 3 Moldovan deputies. Before this, Tatarstan President Rustam Minikhanov was not allowed into the country. But what about Russian gas? Is that not permitted from entering the Republic of Moldova? Well, actually, yes. Moldova is an independent and sovereign state. Russia should not tell us how to act, Rechan said on TV8. We say to everyone who does not respect the choice of the people that everyone should know their place. The Prime Minister hinted that Kirkorov and other Russian artists were on the list and promised that we will shut the mouths of all those who propagandize and saw war, he added. Shouting mouths is so European. Deputy Prime Minister Nicu Popescu, at a meeting in Chisinau with his Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba, generally said that Moldova wants to participate in the creation of a special international tribunal for crimes of Russia. At the same time, Energocom will purchase 92% of the electricity in May from the Moldovan State District Power Plant in Transnistria, a minuscule amount from Ukrhydroenergo, and the Romanian company Nuclear Electrica SA has generally taken a time out and is carrying out scheduled repair work. Yeah, this is the kind of disinformation that is quite funny to watch. In reality, already at the time of this article, the entirety of the infrastructure of Moldova was being connected to Romania. And in the meantime, the Romanian company took over the entire infrastructure of gas infrastructure in Moldova from Gazprom. So, in fact, things worked out pretty well. But again, this kind of disinformation stuck. There's still quite a few, I would say, in double digits. A minority, sure, but a significant minority of the Moldovan electorate that just simply doesn't know that because they only read this. Right? So there's that. Ordinary Moldovan citizens living in Russia will suffer from the deterioration of Moldovan-Russian relations. It will be difficult for the embassy to serve them, says expert Alexander Stachurski. He believes that the diplomatic scandal is a strategic move to exclude Moldovans living in Russia from the election process. The first step has already been taken. Russian observers were not allowed to attend the Bashkan elections. Russia is outraged by Rechan's statements. Deputy Chairman of the Russian Council, Dmitry Medvedev, wrote on his Telegram channel that there is no longer a country like Moldova. A mysterious creature named Rechan reported that neither the president of Russia nor Russian officials will be able to enter their country. Well, first of all, no one is going there now, maybe somehow later. And secondly, there is no such country anymore. Local leaders sold it to Romania, becoming traitors to their homeland, and there is no point in talking to them about anything. Let the people deal with them, and they will finally decide who they are, Moldovans or Romanians, says Dmitry Medvedev. Yeah, that's interesting. A few months later, after this article, I don't know if it was, I remember if it was Putin or Maria Zakharova who also complained about the loss of identity in Moldova because their elite is Romanian. So it was really quite fun. But nevertheless, on one hand, that's why it's funny, and that's why I wanted to read at least some of this article to you, because on one hand, they complain about Russophobia, right? I mean, this article is called "We Have Russophobia," but then at the same time, they're like, "Oh well, let the people decide." Well, they did, and you don't like the decision. So it's always this thing with Moskalistan. That's basically, nothing serious, just Russia. Press secretary of the Russian president Dmitry Peskov confirmed that Chisinau is heading towards a loss of sovereignty. There you go. They have already destroyed their language. They no longer call it Moldovan. We see a drift towards absorption on the part of Romania, actions aimed at deliberately curtailing its own sovereignty. Peskov is confident that these processes do not correlate with the mood in society. We see protests, a huge number of dissenters. The leadership is rapidly drifting towards well-known Russophobia. There you go. They believe that this should be an absolutely mandatory attribute of European integration, to hate Russia and any pro-Russian manifestations. Well, have you tried not committing mass murder? It tends to help. The main thing in the marathon of Russophobic antics lies ahead. On May 9, we will witness the first fight against the St. George ribbon. Now, of course, I did make a video in English from that particular event. Nothing serious happened there either. Of course, it was just standard garden variety panic porn. Maybe one day I should make a video about panic porn in itself, because panic porn has its own utility in propaganda, and learning to recognize it tends to help. In any event, the decision of the Moldovan authorities to ban the wearing of the St. George ribbon is shameful. It's a fight against one's own past, says the vice speaker of the Russian Federation Council, Konstantin Who Cares. According to an official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, a new step towards the renunciation of sovereignty is the establishment in the Republic of Moldova of a partner mission of the Европейский Союз within the framework of the decision made in April the 24th at the meeting of the foreign ministers of the Европейский Союz. We see that the EU is increasingly trying to gain foothold in the post-Soviet space. It uses the deployment of its field presences as a tool by emphasizing the partnership nature of the new mission. The EU members, as always, are disingenuous. The sign should not create illusions about what EU representatives will be doing there, exercising de facto external governance of Moldova. The history of EU mediation efforts is well known. The civilian mission to Armenia, deployed for geopolitical reasons in February, did not contribute to the normalization of relations in Transcaucasus, so the EU has nothing to boast about yet. This commentary by Maria Zakharova aged like milk. Because in the meantime, the main failure in Transcaucasus was, let me think about, yes, Russia. The Russian peacekeepers were resolutely unable to keep the peace and resolutely unable to fulfill their mission as an official ally of Armenia. There's that. Yes, the EU has nothing to boast of, because the EU is a bureaucratic conglomerate that is at its best useless, and in the rest of the time absolutely harmful. But still, you're not in the position to criticize it, given that your track record is even worse. Anyway, however, State Duma says that Moldova has not turned into anti-Russia, since a significant part of the country's population maintains a friendly attitude towards us. This, of course, applies to the older generation who remembers the Soviet times, but not only. The new authorities of Moldova are trying to jump out of their pants, proving their commitment to Atlanticism, the desire to join the Европейский Союз and NATO, wanting to completely surrender the statehood of Moldova by entering Romania. These new statements are just another attempt to attract attention and can cause nothing but irony, says this guy from State Duma. Sandu does not have any sane program and policy for the development of the country, except for endless stories about bad Russia, which still supplies gas to Moldova, not anymore, and equally endless stories about what kind of paradise will come to Moldova when it becomes a member of the Европейский Союз, and it will heal like in Europe, says Alexei Pushkov, chairman of the Federation Council Commission on, the hell is that, information policy and media interactions with the media, whatever. According to him, the Russians really love their titles and their acronyms, and it's hard to keep up with all of them. According to him, the authors of the Maidan and the coup in Kiev, there you go, caught most of the population of Ukraine with this bait, but for some reason paradise never came, either in 2015 or in 2018 or in 2021. Well, I don't know, considering that the standard of living in Ukraine outpaced the Russian one by 2018 at the latest. I don't know what to say, mate, but paradise may not have come, but it became better than you. So, there's that. Liberal politicians promise 30-year-old residents of the Republic of Moldova joys beyond the horizon, but this is only a way to come to power. And Sandu and others like her are not even liberals. Western liberals have a program for action and economic development, no matter what defects and vices they may suffer from, but these are just pro-Western bureaucrats, imitators, promise sellers supported by the West to include another territory of the Southeast in its sphere of influence, and they work off this support by constantly attacking Russia. Now, this is what I call top-tier propaganda, because this last paragraph is at least in part true. Because, and of course it is in part true, at least because, well, how do you put this one? You can't make a top-tier apparatus out of shit, and apparatus that the Sandu administration has inherited, well, is formed of a lot of post-Soviet and Soviet-style bureaucrats. So, of course, they will be of the expected quality. So that's one aspect. Second aspect, of course, the background of the current cabinet, current as in when I'm taping, maybe something changes by the time I publish this, is one of servile bureaucrats. I mean, that's true. And everyone knows it to be true, and that's why this type of propaganda is quite effective. So, you have around here a bit of panic porn, some true statements here, plenty of BS here, and end with something mostly true. This is what I call highly effective propaganda, very good quality, well, maybe not very good, but just good. It's really effective. And again, very few are even trying to dispute this one, even though it's not that difficult to argue against it. It's not difficult to demolish, but you have to be interested, and apparently nobody is. Right next to it, there is another article that is also quite good. Why don't Moldovan politicians apologize for their mistakes? Basically, it says here. Over the 31 years of independence, Moldova has had half a dozen presidents, 3 acting presidents, 11 parliaments, 15 heads of government, 10 acting prime ministers. They represented a wide variety of political orientations and party colors, but there is one characteristic that unites all of them: the reluctance and inability to admit their mistakes and ask people for forgiveness for the misfortunes that they brought to them by making these mistakes. And it makes a relatively compelling argument, although this is just the intro of it, and then it continues more somewhere down the line on page 10, whatever. But it makes a relatively compelling argument, and again, it tries to appear impartial. It criticizes a little bit the pro-Russian communists as well. But if it's just too long of an article, and I'm just not gonna read it. And translating from Muskalski to English is not particularly fun. In any event, but it basically says that how should I put this? There has been some mistakes were made, but then when it starts to go into specifics, it attacks the non-Russian governments almost exclusively on geopolitics and connecting that to the economic misfortunes that resulted. Whether that connection is real or not is immaterial. They still do that. Whereas the communist / pro-Russian governments are criticized on some marginal policy issue that probably even most people forgot about. They're not criticized on the substance of their problem. So yeah, this is the kind of Russian propaganda that I have in mind. That I would say it's far more complicated and far more difficult to combat. Or here's this one. This one is actually good news in a way. Why I continue to use the Russian language in Moldova, because that's the law. And basically his argument is that Russian is one of the official languages of the UN, and therefore according to the UN Charter of Human Rights, to which Moldova is a signatory on, he's entitled to use the Russian language whenever he wants. That's a very weird argument. I mean, by that standard, I should be allowed to speak only in French when I go to the United States, right? I mean, come on. or in England. I mean, really, this is crazy. But again, it's a kind of soft argument that shows us one thing. It's now on the Russian to explain why they're still using Russian in a country that is not Russia and whose majority and native tongue is not Russian. This would have been unimaginable 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you would be just expected to swallow all of the coughing in Cyrillic. But nowadays you have to justify it on one hand. On the other hand, of course, it reintroduces more friction, because I fully do expect next time when I'm in Moldova and do my usual routine, which is to basically refuse to speak Russian unless I really, really have to. And believe it or not, most of the time I don't. And I fully do expect one day to be told that it's their human right, according to UN law, to to use Muskalski in public. So yeah, so yeah, basically that's the kind of Russian propaganda that you should be looking out for. Believe it or not, contrary to the impression that was given to the Western public by Western sources, contrary to those, most of these relatively subversive, although admittedly weaker than usual, but still, most of these relatively subversive narratives by Russia do not reach their intended targets via obscure Telegram channels. So no, they usually come through these kinds of things. They still do to this day, which is why I find it funny when the Европейский Союз or other Western institutions are like, oh, we're gonna do a sweep on disinformation. Yeah, good luck. What you're gonna do? Burn all of the copies of these kinds of things? And there's quite a lot of them, and they circulate throughout the whole post-Soviet space. And yeah, this is how they get to. They rely on a very good network of agitators. Many of them are out of conviction, not because they're necessarily paid by the Kremlin or whatever, and word-to-mouth conversations. And especially in smaller countries like Moldova or Kyrgyzstan, it doesn't even take much. It's enough to get a concerned babushka calling the nephew who's out to work, especially if they're out to work in Russia. Now, admittedly, there are very few now in Moldova, very few Moldovans who still work in Russia, but still, it's enough to have the concerned babushka who reads this crap, call the nephew, and then suddenly you can have, and the nephew then will agitate around the Telegram groups and other diaspora places. It's easy to start a scandal, and it usually starts with a newspaper. So that's probably another aspect of Russian propaganda that our friends in the West have yet to master, in the sense that at least be aware that it exists. Unfortunately, our friends in the West still work under the assumption that Russian propaganda functions the same way as Western propaganda. Newsflash, no, it doesn't. Alright, that will be enough for an episode on Russian propaganda. The last episode, of course, will be with Ukrainian propaganda, because hey, why not? Thanks a lot for watching, and see you around quite soon on the Freedom Alternative and on the Propaganda Basement next week. Cheers.